All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Will Moss. I'm the CEO of HBCU Connect. Super excited to have you at our noon session as a part of our HBCU Connect Spring Virtual Conference and Career Fair. This session is going to be related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, advocating for change within your organization. So allow me to introduce our presenter, Lexi Pacheco, Rocky Mountain Prep Talent Acquisition Partner. So Lexi, if you're ready, you can take it away.
Let's get into it. I'm ready. Thanks for the intro. Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be in this space with me. I am going to work through a couple of different big concepts around DEIB in the workplace. And we're going to transition a little bit from some personalized learning because, as we all know, the work has to start with us. And then we'll kind of talk about some tactical and logistical ways that you might be able to bring this, whether into your direct workplace now, or in the teams that you're with, or in the future. Before we do that, I just want to check really quick with my facilitators to make sure the waiting room's being checked on. Yeah, Will and Louisa, people will be let in as
Yes,
they.
yeah, we got it. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about me. Let me move to my screen. Here we go. This is me. As you can see, I'm Lexi Pacheco. I am a talent acquisition partner with Rocky Mountain Prep. We are a charter school network out of Denver, Colorado, and we are a mission-driven organization serving pre-K, really students as young as 8 weeks up to 12th grade. We're mission driven. We believe in democratizing college access for students in the Denver metro area. And we have a booth. So if you'd like to learn more about careers at Rocky Mountain Prep or learn more about the work we're doing and to democratize college access, come and see about us later. But to give you a little bit more about me, I've got my contact here. I'd love to connect with you. I'll share this again as we move through the presentation at the end. But want to just take a moment and introduce my work and what this work specifically in DEIB has meant to me. So I was a elementary teacher for many years before I moved into hiring work. I went to college for a psychology degree in early childhood development and learning and behavior, and decided to get a teaching degree there too. And taught second and third grade. I also was a new teacher coach. And throughout my time, as I was teaching and in the classroom and in buildings, I was able to really see, not just as a queer Latina woman myself, but I was able to just see the incredible need for DEI and B work, not just in education, but in all of the places where connections and work and innovation is being done. And so that leads me to this work that I've been involved in for the past 10 years. I have completed and facilitated over 100 hours of cultural competency, DEI and B, implicit bias, anti-racism, anti-bias, whatever term we want to use right now, because I think we cycle through quite a few. But I have done this work for the past 10 years, whether in education specific places or in other different capacities. So hello, everyone. That is me. I will be bringing, hopefully, my expertise and knowledge about this, and hopefully providing you some strong and usable techniques and strategies in your everyday work. So a little bit more about the work we're going to be doing together here today. I adamantly believe that DEI and B and anti-racist, anti-bias work is a way of life. I believe it is a way of thinking and looking at the world. It's crucial to being willing to change and adapt as the world does, and my experiences with others do as well. I think Will said it at the beginning of this call. It is most timely, especially now, for us to continue this work and continue these conversations that have already been happening as we continue to see a lot of different consequences and effects of this work being stopped. And so what I would love to do is, if you could, in the chat box right now, I would love to get a feel of the folks that are here. If you could please in the chat send your name, where you're coming from, where you are in the world, as I like to say, and tell me something good. Tell me something good about your day, a bright spot in your day. So I'm going to type that in the chat for us. So give me your name, where you are in the world, and tell me something good. I'll start as you all are typing. Thanks, Will, for doing that in the chat. I'm Lexi. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm from Ohio, born and raised. And something good is that my puppy turned 1 year old. So we're excited about that. OHIO. That's right. Every time. Awesome. We got so many different places. Being alive and kicking. That's so true. I'll be relocating soon. Okay, awesome. We got Tennessee, Houston, Mississippi. I love it. Happy birthday, Veronica. Love that for you. Virginia, Texas, Houston. Oh my gosh, so fun. I love it when we have so many different places. I'm going to let those continue to come through and I'll continue to be monitoring those. Amazing. Couple people from Ohio too. We love to see it. We love to see a Midwest connection. Amazing. I'm going to also continue to tell you a little bit about myself as well. So I am bilingual. I grew up speaking Spanish. My family is from Puerto Rico, and they moved stateside when both my parents were going through their schooling. And so this work has not only become incredibly relevant to me as I was growing up and experiencing a lot of bias and prejudice, not only because of my language barrier and the fact that I had to learn English. Um, in the chat, can anybody put in the chat if you also were a student who was growing up needing to learn English as a second language? I'd love to kind of see what that breakdown would look like for us here, because I know I'm not alone there. Aries season, I love it. Oh my gosh, I love it. Yeah, so tell me in the chat, anybody who has also been who grew up in education and English was a second language for them. That is something, okay, very cool. Yeah. It is something that really provided me even from the age at 9 or 10, I knew that I was being treated differently. I knew that my education looked different from that of others. And I knew that my capacity was being challenged. My capacity and my ability to do the thing, my potential was being questioned. And so that is what really, really started off the journey for me in what I think has come down to creating access and pathways and opportunities for us as professionals to come together, do the work a little bit, and then take that work and figure out what it practically means for us so that we can create places where our colleagues, our friends, our teammates are able to not only feel like they are included, but that they have access to be able to be authentic in this space. As we know, DE&B is crucial for innovation, it's crucial for psychological safety, and it's crucial for us to be able to actually be fulfilled and feel like we are doing the work in a way that is authentic and genuine to us. And so the three big topics that I'm going to go through today, thank you everyone for putting stuff in the chat. It's exciting to see that I'm not alone and that there were a couple of other folks who were learning English as a second language too. It's a lot. It's a lot. Big topics that we're going to be talking about today are identity work and how crucial and pivotal it is in connecting it to our implicit biases and how implicit bias shows up in the workforce and in the workplace. We're then going to lead that into some talking about inclusive leadership traits and cultural competency and how those go together. Cultural responsiveness, cultural competency, both the same language in the research. And then finally, I'm going to have some time for us to talk together in a wider discussion. We're going to have some reflection prompts that I'll guide you through, and again, have some time for a bigger Q&A. Are we all ready? Let's get into it. Let's do it. So, identity and bias. I would love a quick check-in here for everybody. Tell me your comfortability slash familiarity with identity work and bias work on a scale of 1 to 5. The reason that I'm getting into this and what might feel like a kind of like basic level of instruction from here is because we have to set the foundation, right? Like we have to set the general framework of where we're headed so that our scope and sequence can make sense. Okay, we got a lot of threes, fabulous. Okay, a lot of fours, an eight. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so 1 to 5. Yeah, what is your comfortability slash familiarity with identity and bias work? Amazing. Okay, I love a good range. Sounds like we've got a solid 3, 4 though, which is great. So then I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna adjust my teaching a little bit here. I'm ever the elementary teacher. I'm going to kind of go into then higher level thinking around identity. What's important for us to know in ourselves as the colleagues that we would like to be and the colleagues we would like to be perceived as is that our personal identity is going to be the first layer that we take into our social identity. And so when you think about child development, right, as a child grows up, they are creating and cultivating their personal identity based off of a very small world, right? What's their favorite color? What order of the sibling pattern are they? Where do they live? What parents or family structure do they have? Do they have any pets? Do they like spicy food? Do they like crunchy food? I'm sure if all of you have kids, you know a lot of opinions that your children have about all the things. And so that is a very good example of the personal identity. We then take that personal identity and we form a social identity. The social identity is going to take what we know of ourselves and it's going to bring in social consequences. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, but we have social nuances that then happen that build off of those. And so we create what's called in-group and out-group dynamics. And so we say things like, I really love dogs. So I'm going to probably have affinity, and that's a type of bias too, but I'm going to have affinity with, I'm going to naturally feel drawn to people who also like sports, to people who also like to try new food, people who also live in a place near where I am. Those are some very basic, non consequential things that we can kind of have affinity with, but that's personal to social. And then as you're going to see on this graphic that I have here on the bottom right, we move from social to professional identity formation. In the research, it's called PIF. And so professional identity formation is like the culmination of all of the work that psychologically we are doing from day dot as an infant to going through school and then leaving school and entering the workforce. Our professional identity formation is going to be fluid, just like any other part of our identities, right? What I mean by that is that our professional identity formation is going to be highly contingent upon the expectations, environments, and cultural norms that the workplace has for us and the ones that we are bringing to the table. For example, when I was going through my undergrad, we had a teacher prep program, right? And so we had classes around this is what you do when you are creating an assessment to see what a student's learning about the material is. This is how you do parent-teacher conferences. And so I was able to take that professional learning around, okay, these are some of the expectations that people have around teachers and how teachers show up, and I'm going to take that into my next workplace. Sometimes they clash, sometimes they don't. This is where we start to see a lot of other social constructs like code switching happening, right? Where we have all of the things that come into our personal and social identities that may or may not mix or match with the workplace that we're in. And again, that workplace is going to be highly contingent on the environment, the people who are there, again, the expectations, how clear those expectations were made to you, this, that, and the other. The reason I'm spending so much time here on identity is because, again, it all starts with us. It starts with our own self-reflection. It starts with our ability to identify the various identities that we possess in relation to others. because it's all about our connection to other people. DEIB is rooted deeply in connection, connection to ourselves, connection to others. Up next, I want to show you the identity wheel. Can you give me a yes or a no if you've seen a social identity wheel before?
No.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. So a social identity wheel is going to be a visual, and this has been made standardized by the University of Michigan. Boo, Michigan, Ohio State. No, I'm kidding. But this has become standardized by the University of Michigan and their LSA, their School of LSA. And it is a visual for us to see all of the different layers and components of our identities. And so as you look at the wheel, right, we'll go through. So our identity includes our race, our first language, our national origin, sexual orientation, gender, socioeconomic status, religion, spirituality, and age. There are many more, and there are many more specificities we can look at, but this is going to be the largest categories that make up our social identity. Our social identity is the way that we connect with others. It is the way that we see ourselves and the way that the world often sees us. And so, for example, I am a Latina woman, 30 years old, no children. I come from a very big family that's very religious. All of those things are going to facilitate my view of the world. It's going to facilitate the opinions that I make, the perceptions that I have, and unfortunately, the assumptions that I make about others, right? For example, I talked about affinity before, right? Affinity is a really core concept when it comes to connection in DEI and B work. I am likely going to feel more comfortable with folks who are in my ethnic group, who are in my age and ethnic group, because that's how we are as humans. We are pro-social and we are wired to be in with the in group, the group of people who have the most traits that identify with us too. What I'm modeling here for you is a work that we can do very simply in our workplaces as we're building camaraderie, building team. We're teaming when we're teaming together and making that connection. Social identity is going to be the first step for us to break into more, what's the word that I'm looking for here? More complicated conversations around bias, privilege, etc. Give me a quick thumbs up in the chat if you feel like social identity is something that moving forward you have a better understanding of. Yes, our social identity is the way we connect with others. Exactly. Beautiful. So again, prompt is give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat if you feel like you have a better understanding of social identity moving forward. Beautiful. Okay. It's important to name here as well that there are three key areas that are going to be nuanced when we talk about social identity, and that's going to be marginalization, privilege, and intersectionality. Marginalized identities will likely have unique experiences to that of non-marginalized identities. Marginalized identities meaning those identities who have experienced in some way oppression or prejudice based off of their identity, which, as we've all come to understand together, are things that we do not control, right? The home we were born into, the race we were born into, the gender we were born into. Those are things that are part of our formation. Privilege, right? Who has power? Who doesn't? Who has voice? Who's at the table? Who doesn't? And it's beyond that too, right? If we're gonna get really into it, right? Like it goes further than that. It's who's intentionally not being invited to the table, right? And then intersectionality. One of my favorite researchers of all time, Kimberly Crenshaw, pioneered the work around intersectionality and identity. That when we combine two or more identities together, we're going to experience a whole new realm. We're going to open a new portal, if you will, right? Being Black and a woman comes together, it's its own identity. Being Latina and queer, its own identity. Having a socioeconomic status, for example, being trans and also being a low socioeconomic status, that's going to compound. So when we start to work together, because as we know, our identities do not live in isolation of each other. You don't silo off your gender and only think about your gender in one way, right? You're always going to see it through the lens of the other identities you have. That is intersectionality. And so I just want to name here that this wheel looks very straightforward, and this work is not. It is very complicated and it's nuanced. And so it begs to be said that these three key concepts, marginalization, privilege, and intersectionality, will always create a further level of nuance for us to consider and be mindful of when we're having these conversations. Moving right along. And so as we're moving through our learning here together, the ways that we can work to proactively be reflective of our identities and the ways that they are showing up in our interactions with others is through prompting. Prompting can literally be as simple as reflection questions you ask yourself as you go through your own decisions in the workplace. For example, one might be, I'm making a decision for my team. Who have I consulted to make this decision? Have I consulted all of the stakeholders that are necessary? What is the gender and ethnic makeup of the people I consulted? Did I only consult one type of person? Whose voice am I leaving out? What assumptions have I made about who is there and who is not there that I should think about before moving forward with this decision? That series of questioning is going to be our first wall of defense in creating uninclusive environments, right? So when we want to create inclusive environments, which I believe all of us here today who have joined this space would like to do, is we're going to first check ourselves. We're going to check the bias and the perspectives that we are coming with first, and then reflect on those, possibly iterate the process, move forward. Something I want to see here that I want to emphasize here is that identity influences the way we see the world and the way the world sees us. That leads us into bias. This is, quick pause here, friends. This is a crash course. We are moving very fast through this work because I have an hour and I want to make the most of our time. And we could spend 8 hours on a professional development on cognitive bias. We could spend 8+ hours, each of us doing an identity wheel and talking about the implications and the prompting around that, right? For all intents and purposes, we're going to keep it pushing. Cognitive bias is a concept around the way our brains work when processing information. Our brain literally has 1,300 pieces of information every 13 milliseconds. We only process and cognitively think about 20% of that. I'm going to say that again. Our brain has over 1,000 different stimulus inputs every 13 milliseconds. We process cognitively 20% of that. What our brain does for us as lovely humans is it creates mental shortcuts for us so that we don't have to spend the rest of our day thinking about the way that the breeze is coming in through the window, or the way that there's a dog barking on the street outside of us, or the fact that our sweater feels kind of warm on us right now, and that there's somebody talking over there and I have a phone call in 10 minutes, right? Like, if we did that, we would not be able to be nearly as effective. And so our brain, through evolution, has created shortcuts for us to make the thinking a little easier. Where that becomes troublesome is that those shortcuts might not be inclusive or considerate of the experiences and identities of others. And that's why it's cognitive bias. For example, when we see somebody in a meeting, we are immediately in our brain unconsciously collecting data about that person, about the way that they talk, the way that they physically show up in the space, the way that they hold eye contact and their body language, our personal connection to them if we know them or don't know them. We're making assumptions and identifiers around what they look like. Where the cognitive bias comes in is the thoughts that we have and the assumptions we make after that initial data is given to our brain. There are more than 175 types of identified cognitive bias. 8 to 15 of those determine 80% of what we think. I would love to ask the chat really quick. Can you name a type of bias? In the chat, tell me, what is a type of bias? Absolutely. Gender, ageism, race, economic, disability, yes. Class, age, yes. Rachel says, absolutely. Speech, yes. Language. And so what you all are identifying here are those social identities that we have, right? They are informing bias. There are different names of bias for bias. So there's a bias called confirmation bias, which is where if you've ever watched a Law and Order SVU episode, or watched like a movie or thriller, and in the first 20 minutes of the episode or the movie, you feel like you've identified the murderer, right? And that the whole time you're watching the episode, the whole time you're watching the movie, you're looking for clues that confirm to you that that person is the murderer, right? Whether or not that person ends up being the murderer or not, the whole time you've been watching, that confirmation bias tells us that you have been looking for signals, looking for clues that confirm that that person is the murderer to you. That's confirmation bias. We have many other kinds. I will not go into all of them today, or any of them, because again, that's a lot of work that could go. If you'd like more information about it, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk you through it. I don't mean to be dismissive. It's a lot. And it's what I studied in my undergrad. So I have a lot of passion about it. Moving forward, bias is going to facilitate the thoughts we have, which lead to the actions we make. If I believe that, for example, a very common form of confirmation bias in the workplace is you believe that the newer, younger employee who does not have seniority cannot be competent as a senior leader, or not a senior leader, rather, a senior colleague. Whenever that colleague, the colleague who's newer, who's junior, whenever they make a mistake, whenever they, make a typo in an email, they send the wrong document, right? Something happens where they make a human error. In your mind, you are going to say, see, I knew it. I knew that that person wasn't going to be as qualified. I knew that that person wasn't going to be as competent. That is an example of the way that bias can influence the way that we interact with others. Because if in your mind, you've been collecting all these clues that that person's less competent, right? That's going to influence the way that you interact with them. You're going to be less likely to invite them to collaborate with you on projects. You're going to be less likely to seek out their opinion and their work with you. You're going to be less likely to suggest their work to other people and speak highly of them, right? And so where bias is going to be very specific to what we are talking about today is identifying it, stopping it, and seeking connection around it. So I have two graphics here for you. Again, I just want to name really quick. Bias is the unconscious thought and assumption that comes up when we experience other people and other things. It can be prejudicial. It is not necessarily in and of itself prejudicial. It can be, but bias is a thought that we have, a perception that we have that is not inclusive of the reality or the facts. They often are based on feelings. They are often based on reactions. I think that's really important for us to name. Bias is something that just comes up for us and is not based on facts. And so the folks at Franklin Covey, yeah, absolutely, Dorcas. The folks at Franklin Covey, they've come out with a book, Fuller, Murphy, and Chow, Unconscious Bias for Leaders. I would highly recommend it for anybody in the workforce. They do a fantastic job about talking about the ways in which our thought processes and perspectives influence the way we interact with others in our workplace. Highly recommend it. Again, it's called Unconscious Bias by Fuller, Murphy, and Chow. They created this graphic here with the 3 circles. And so what they talk about in their work is that they talk about identifying the bias, identifying where our thinking is creating an assumption about others, seek where that's coming from, and seek perspective and connection. Okay, thank you. And then, so cultivating that connection, seeking to understand, and then challenging those assumptions. Are those assumptions still correct? Is what that last A in the PSA stands for, and what that choose courage is. It's one of the same thing. So, for example, identifying the bias could be, I have a belief that my younger colleague is not as competent as the more senior colleague on our team. That is a bias, right? It's not rooted in fact. The seek, the cultivate connection is going to be, is this based on facts or feelings? Is this based off of what I would like to believe to be true about this person? And seeking connection. So that could be asking for a non-judgmental conversation with a colleague that you trust, a mentor, and talking through where this bias is coming from. Choosing courage, that's going to be challenging your assumptions. Saying, Is this something that's benefiting my interaction with this person? If it is something that is not rooted in fact, what does it serve? And who does it serve? Moving right along. This leads us into where we show up and how we show up as leaders. So just to do a quick recap. Identity, our personal identity, forms our social identity, which then forms our professional identity in the workplace. Our identities are going to influence the biases that we hold unconsciously. They can become conscious, right, if you start acting on them. But unconsciously, the biases we hold. And if we are unaware, if we continue to choose to be unaware of those biases, they are going to, whether we like it or not, influence the quality and the psychological safety of the environments we are in. So that is why we just did a lot of like self-work awareness to lead into this. And so inclusive leaders are empathetic, they are curious, they are culturally aware and responsive, meaning cultural intelligence. They're active listeners, and they're courageous. These are the qualities that when we look at social psychology research, these qualities are going to be what employees rate to be the most effective and the most important qualities for for a leader that is inclusive. The reason that's important is because now we're going to talk about some of the logistical ways that we can incorporate this thinking and incorporate these kind of checks and balances, because that's what understanding and reflecting on bias is, right? It's incorporating a system of checks and balances in our mind and in the way that we work to make sure that we are not unduly treating a colleague in a way that is solely based off of our feelings or our reaction or our unconscious biases. And so there's two ways that we can look at this. We can talk about designing inclusive teams. We can also talk about fostering diverse perspectives. And so when we talk about designing inclusive teams, 4 research-backed strategies that are going to create feelings of connection, belonging, and inclusion and equity in your teams are going to be setting clear expectations and support systems from day dot. This is your role. This is how it functions. And this is the support system you have in place when issues come up and confusion or miscommunication comes up. Cultural norms explained explicitly. For example, in this office, we are a business casual. So we don't wear jeans in this office. We are, I was just meeting with a group of the legal team over at the NASA Glenn Center in Cleveland. They were the last group that I did this work with. And the chief legal counsel, she was talking about how one of our cultural norms is that we are lawyers. And so we want to create that sense of rapport and that sense of respect by the ways that we look and the way that we come into a space. And so I want all of my lawyers, I want everybody on my legal team to be in a suit whenever they have business meetings with external stakeholders. If we're just here at the office, you can wear jeans and a polo, that's fine. But the expectation is that if we are meeting with clients externally, you're in a suit, right? That is an example of a cultural norm being explained explicitly with the why. The why is important because if you've ever tried to tell a 9-year-old that they have to do something and you didn't tell them why, it is not going to be successful. The same is true for adults. They have to have the why. Fourth, early access to feedback loops. That means, where can I go as an employee, as a colleague, to provide feedback on a process, on an experience I had to be able to improve upon that? Where do I go and who do I talk to provide feedback so that the process or the experience can be reiterated and improved or continue to be if it was a good experience? Fourth, representation and training content and delivery. We know that to be true that as young as 8 weeks old, children perceive representation. They perceive if the people around them look like them, if they share the same skin color with them, if they share the same physical attributes, if they share the same language. As early as 8 weeks, children perceive representation. Same is true for adults. And I'll say it over and over again. I think somebody put it in the chat. Thank you. It's true. What works with kids 99% of the time is going to be true for adults. And so representation in meetings, in the way that you're communicating, is important. Something as simple as when you're writing an email to your teammates, right? Perhaps you're doing a sign off for the holiday break, right? Checking yourself because you might be coming from a household that celebrates Hanukkah. So your household doesn't celebrate Christmas. You know, you're signing off for your winter holiday break, right? When you're writing that email to your colleagues to say, I hope everyone enjoys their holiday break, using language that is inclusive and aware and represents the people on your team. Whether you're celebrating Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever it is, right? Or not celebrating, including that in that language. Another example could be when you're speaking to colleagues, instead of saying things that are very specific, like when you're talking about family structure, saying things like, you know, for all my women with husbands, for all my men with wives. That's incredibly exclusionary language, because that's not true of everyone, right? So being aware of the language you use, because that creates representation. Next category of items and tactical things to take away. For fostering diverse perspectives, which we know to be incredibly important for innovation and efficiency in workplaces, is to have rotating meeting facilitation. This is one example. This is one idea. So perhaps in a tactical that you have weekly, you rotate who leads the agenda, who's the timekeeper, who's the note taker. Anonymous input tools. That's going to tie into that feedback loop that I suggested earlier. Anonymous input tools, instead of it being a feedback loop where it is iterative, an input tool is going to be, how do I just submit that something happened or that I had an experience, that I have input around something, and I might not feel psychologically safe enough to do it with my name attached. I'd like to do it anonymously. And then affinity-based mentorship. That's going to be things like affinity groups, DEI and B book clubs, where you are going to be connecting with colleagues and creating spaces where folks with shared identities can come together and be in space together. And then finally, inclusive meeting norms. Do we have closed captioning in our meetings? Do we have somebody who's going to send a agenda, a quick kind of the minutes of what we talked about afterwards? Do we feel like people are able to show up in lots of different ways in these meetings? And then we're about at our time. And so I definitely want to, oh goodness, I can't go to the next slide. What's happening? Excuse me, everybody. Sorry about that. I'd love to open it up right now. I have two things that I want to share with you before we open it up. The first is to talk about our actionable steps. I think that all of our learning that we've done in the past 40 minutes leads us to discussing these actionable steps. I would love to open it up to you in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Pick out one of these actionable steps out of the 8 that I shared with you and give me an example of what that could look like for you. And then I also want to talk about what the impact of it could be. So your instructions again are, of the 8 suggestions I've provided, take one. What is an actionable example of how it could show up for you? And what would the impact of it be?
I think I have one that I can contribute.
Please, I'd love to hear it.
Um, so I'm looking at cultural norms explained explicitly. Is that one of them? One of the 8, correct?
That's right.
Okay. So in my world, which is healthcare because I'm a nurse, um, it's very important when I'm training a new hire or even just going with another nurse that they understand that healthcare is exceptionally diverse and that we have to be aware. I think you mentioned different backgrounds. Um, it's astonishing to me how little people realize things like diets, especially if someone's of Orthodox faith, they may not want a female nurse or a male nurse. Women may not want to be touched by a male doctor or a male nurse. So those are the things that I think are very important. And being someone that's, they call me non-traditional now, but I'm older. When I have young graduates who are just in their 20s, this is their first time, first rodeo, it's really kind of frightening that, they're not cognizant of these things. So I just think that those are things that need to be, I think we can teach one another. If you see something wrong, step in and teach that person so that it doesn't turn into something that can be a negative, and it also leaves a positive spin for that person that's learning it. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Disrupting bias when we see it happening and gently kind of calling that person in to
Yeah.
that connection and saying, actually, this is where that perspective is wrong. And this is where this is actually this, this is where you're wrong. Absolutely. And when talking about cultural norms as well, like you said, being explicit in naming them, if you are in the healthcare field and you're working with a wide variety of folks whose cultural and ethnic backgrounds are going to make huge impacts on the way they interact with you,
Right.
the rest of the team,
Mm-hmm.
naming that from the jump, absolutely. Saying
Mm-hmm.
things like, when we work with folks who might have Orthodox faith, there are going to be situations where we have to be mindful about who their caretaker is, who's going to be taking their blood pressure and touching them physically. When we meet with
Absolutely.
folks who are perhaps kosher in their diet, like you said, they're going
Mm-hmm.
to have opinions and perspectives about what that diet means to them personally. Absolutely. Naming those, because the closer that we can come to naming those and creating dialogue and creating a shared understanding is, and this is to everyone in the group, is what will help us facilitate true inclusion and
Mm-hmm.
true belonging and connection. Thank you, Millicent, for sharing that. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Absolutely.
I'm going to check the chat here, but if anybody else would like to raise their hand or come off mute, the prompt is still the same. Out of the 8 I shared, what's an example and what would the impact be? Edgar, I see you in the chat. Please come off mute and share.
Thank you very much. I can give you what I've done that included all 8. Up until a few months ago, I was the top manager in Office of Diversity and Management and Equal Opportunity at ACF. And I developed employees resource groups. And we had a total of 14. And those resource groups included every different ethnic um, person you can think of. For example, we had a Native American we had Asian, we had African American, uh, 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 we had LGBT. Even the first time ever happened in the federal government, we had a faith-based organization that I developed. Also, before they done all of this reorganizing, you could see a DVD that I produced called the Employees Resource Group ERG Train. And some of the private industry were using this to even train their particular organizations. And these employees resource group, the way they were developed, number one, you had to come together. There had to at least be 7 members, that 7 staff that is willing to create it. You also had to complete an application, which was submitted to me for my approval, which included all of these 8 that you're talking about had to be addressed within the application. And so what we found out, and like in 2016, when I took this over, ACF had not one employees resource group. And within that time, up until a few months ago, we developed 14 and I was working on 3 more. And so within those years, I got over 21 awards. I was training people in different agencies throughout the federal government on how to implement diversity and inclusion. And what we found out through surveys and data, that over the time of these employees resource groups were developed, morale changed within ACF. We didn't have many people leaving and coming as we did before. The government survey that we put out every year for all federal agencies, the numbers went up for participation. At the time, ACF had over 30, at that point, 1,300 employees, and my resource group was serving over 1,100. And these resource groups came together to discuss issues, address issues that would relate to me, and I would relay them up the chain to management. Also discuss things that were working, things that was positive, and how they could grow as a team. And all of the groups would meet every 2 months so we could come together and address all different ethnic groups with each other. So you start finding out that people were having initiatives that they were doing for example, Black History Month. You would have Asians being a part of that. You would have the Indians being part of that. You would have the Hispanic being a part of that. They all started to interact with each other to improve the culture and improve diversity at ACF. And I was, we did a great job. We had a great team. We did a great job. And what we did, also one of the things I implemented after a couple of years, to give others within the organization, say you was doing grants and you was at a dead end job. I created what they call special emphasis program managers, in which the staff manager agreed to give me 20% of their PMAP, their performance management action plan. And so they got experience in diversity, and some of them changed careers and went on outside outside the government, as well as across the government doing diversity. So it works. I look at the news a lot. I get frustrated because every time they talk about D&I, they always think it's just the hiring. You hire so many Blacks, so many minorities. And not just that. It's once you bring them on board, how do you get them to interact with each other to change the culture of the agency? I'm gonna stop here because it's been a love of mine that I could talk about it forever, but that's who I am, that's what I was born to be, to do. And so, and a lot to add to one of the competencies that you had to have because I was rated at one of the tops, and the people said, well, what's the skill that Mr. Reese most have? And it was honesty. And I didn't go into developing a group with any stereotypes. Because once the group was developed, they then became an affinity group and they were on their own. And they determined what they discussed. They determined what initiatives that they want to address, what activities that they wanted to be a part of.
So we appreciate your input, sir. Thank you. Okay, Lexi, we're gonna have to close out. We only have 3 minutes left. So if you have any final words before we head out.
Absolutely. I want to say thank you so much. I appreciate the ability to be in space with you all. I have a couple different things that I'll send along the way. I have first an example of cards that you can print out for you and your colleagues. They're called I commit cards. They're things that you can do individually that can support in this work. I also have resources, research and different work that has informed my teaching and learning, and so I'd be happy to provide that as well. Here's the link to it here for further reading. And then also, I'm going to provide my contact information. I would love to connect with you, whether it is to talk more about this session or to support you in your DEI and B work moving forward in your places and spaces. I just want to thank you all again for being in space with me today. It's been a pleasure learning with you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful session.
Thank you so much, friends. Will and Louisa, will other folks be joining this specific link for the next development?